Hi, this is Bill Punch. This video is one of a series of videos used to support Michigan State University's Introduction to Computer Science using Python CSE 231. This video will cover an introduction to some of the basic types in Python and show us the things that we can do with them. Let's get started. So the first question is exactly what is a type? And as you can see on the screen here, type actually defines two things about a piece of data. Number one, it defines some of the internal structure of the data, right? So one data might have certain information stored in it, a different type might have others. And then depending on the type of the data, some operations are appropriate and some are not. So a type summarizes structured data in the operations that you can perform on that structured data. Python actually provides a very large number of types, but I want to look at three particular ones today, which we have to use very early in our programs, and those are the integers, the floating point numbers, and strings. So I think we know what an integer is. It's a number without a decimal point. Every type in Python has a particular name, and for Python, the official name for an integer is an int, int. If we're not sure what the type is of a particular object, there's a special function called the type function. And the type function gives us information on the type. And so here is an operation that prints some integers that we have. Number 1, minus 127, a very long integer, and a printing of what the type of a particular object is. 1, 2, 3, let's go ahead and evaluate that. So when I print the integers out, that's exactly what we get. And notice that the result of the type function is the fact that the name of the type that we're working with is in fact int. One of the interesting things about an integer is that there's no limitation on the size. This is a very large integer, and there's no size limitation on integers in Python. They can be as big as you like. Secondly, Python allows all operations on integers to be exact, no approximation. The second type is float or floating point numbers. And a floating point number is pretty much what we'd expect. It's numbers with decimal points. And its official name is float, F-L-O-A-T. Let's take a look. We print out some floating point numbers and we look at the class and we see it's of type float. There's a particular way we can use floating point numbers to represent scientific notation, and this is the way we do it in Python. It's the number followed by the letter E followed by the power that we raise it to. So 6.02 E minus 23 is equivalent to 6.02 times 10 to the minus 23rd. The third type that we are going to work with is strings. The name string is a very odd name. It's not clear where from at first blush where it comes from. In fact, it comes from compositors, people who used to take individual pieces of type and put them together so that they can be used in a printing press. And strings are nothing more than a sequence of characters, and with either delimiters of double quotes or single quotes, it doesn't matter. And a string reproduces exactly what's typed between its delimiters, and its official name is str, short for string. So we can enter these in again to see what type they are. So when I print a string, it prints exactly, and if I ask what type a particular string is, it says it's a class string. It's important that you know that you need to begin and end a string with the same delimiter. So we can start with a double quote, but then we have to end with a double quote. So if we try to do it with a single quote, we'll get an error, which we see right there. It's important to remember that the character string 1 between quotes is not the same as the integer 1. They are different types. This is a string. This is an int. And because of their types, we can perform different operations on them. Integers, we can do operations like plus and minus. String, we can do things like manipulation of the string. In order to keep those things straight, Python provides us a way to convert things between one and another. The name for the converting function is usually the same as the name of the type. So there's an int function, a float function, and a string function, and it does exactly what you would imagine. Some particular object, when run through the int, returns an integer or a float or a string. So if I say the integer of the character string 1, I get to 1. If I get the integer of the character string 1, 2, 3, I get the integer back. If I take a floating point number and turn it into an integer, I get truncation. It's not rounding, it simply lops off the decimal part and returns the integer part. For strings, we get much the same thing. If I take an integer 1 and convert it with a string, I get the string 1 back. And you can tell that it's a string again by looking at the fact that it's enclosed in quotes. I can take a floating point number and turn it into a string. I get a string back, and again, I know it's a string because I can see it. There are the quotes. It does exactly what you expect. It turns any object into a string. Float does very much the same thing. Take a floating point number, represent it as a string, get a floating point number back. Take the integer 1, and you in fact get a floating point number back, and you know it's a floating point number because when you look at it, you see that it's 0.0 at the end. So the integer 1 is different from the floating point 1.0. One more thing, we talked about function quite a bit. I just want to mention what a function is. We'll have a lot to say about it later, but basically a function is a small program that performs some specific task, and functions are usually represented as a name followed by parentheses. And so here's the print function, there's its name, there's the parentheses. This is an invocation of a small function to perform some operation. Functions usually have one of two things they can do, sometimes both, sometimes only one. They can produce a side effect, or they can return a value. The print function, as an example, has a side effect. It goes out and it performs an operation, it prints a value to the screen, but it has no side effect. The function int takes in the value string 345, doesn't perform a side effect, but returns the value 3.5. Print and int and float and str are all built-in functions that provide some operation for us that Python has given us for free, and we'll see a lot more of those as we go along.